Hey, it's Julia back with Rob Swiatek today. And did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Okay, good. Pretty good. That's good. And you are on the MUFON board, right?
Board of directors, that's correct.
And would you just let people know, just in case they don't know, what MUFON stands for?
Yes, MUFON stands for the Mutual UFO Network, and it dates back to 1969. That was the year of its formation.
Also the year of my formation, so I
Oh,
am
okay.
sympathetic towards MUFON. That's wonderful. Okay, great. I have 5 questions I need to, well, actually, I added a sixth one, surprise question at the end,
Okay.
that we need to get to. But before we do you want to just lay out a little bit of your history and how you got involved with MUFON? What drew you to MUFON?
I've actually had an interest in UFOs for many years, almost back to back to 1969. That's for sure. A little bit before, just a tiny bit before, and but back at that time they had something going on called the University of Colorado UFO study, and that was in the news a lot. And of course, they didn't have the internet back then, so news on UFOs appeared either on the weekly, the daily news channels, or in the newspaper. So I was intrigued by UFO sightings. They were once in a while reported in our local newspaper, but there were a number of books that had been coming out, and I kept abreast of those, and I was just completely intrigued by the whole subject. And I kept that interest through college, and eventually, after I started my job in Washington, D.C., in the 70s, I joined something called the Fund for UFO Research, which still exists actually,
Really?
and it has its the address is our house, but we had a number of very reputable UFO researchers of many years in the field. Richard Hall, Don Berliner, people like that, who had been with an earlier organization called NICAP. And so I sort of cut my teeth with the Fund for UFO Research all through the 90s, and also worked in collaboration with people in MUFON and the Center for UFO Studies. And it's very possible that you probably already have spoken with someone in the Center for UFO Studies.
Yeah,
Maybe
CUFOS, yeah.
yeah, Mark Rodiger, or someone who's a
Mhm.
good friend of mine
Yeah.
to this very day. And then I was asked to join the MUFON board in 2003, 2004, something like that. So, and I've worked in all areas of ufology, both in MUFON and with the Fund for UFO Research. We've been out to the field at Roswell. We've worked with abductees. We've analyzed samples of stuff. We've interviewed witnesses, and so it's the whole 9 yards plus.
Yeah, wow.
Maybe 19 yards.
Well, but so all of this was outside of your professional work, right?
That is correct. Yes, it's an avocation, unfortunately, for almost all of us.
Yeah, and what is your professional work if you're open to saying what it has
Yeah,
been?
no, it's not. I have a background in science and physics, and I spent my career at the United States Patent and Trademark Office in Washington, D.C., Virginia, actually, it's in. And many years there, I was in the aeronautics area and astronautics. So had a chance to see what was going on with some of the aviation developments there for many years.
Oh, were you a patent lawyer?
No, I'm not an attorney, but yeah, I'm a
You looked
scientist.
for
And
prior
look at,
art? You would
yeah,
like consult for prior art? Is that what it
yeah,
was?
yeah. We'd have to go through all the earlier patents and the relevant literature, such as it is on the invention you're looking for, be it an aileron or landing gear, seating
Anti-gravity thing.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And curiously enough, the schedule, as they call it, the classification for aircraft has many different types of aircraft, as you can imagine in the schedule. And, tilted, swept back wings and the landing gear, blah, 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 on and on and on. There's several hundred subclasses. One of them was circular aircraft. So every once in a while, one of those circular aircraft would pass across my desk, as it did other people. And so I found myself working on what my avocation is, which is always a weird thing. You
Yeah.
literally get a flying saucer invention,
Yeah,
and
yeah, sure.
it would be maybe have a turbojet engine or something that someone invented. But a few of them I gave patents to, because they came up with some novel arrangements for putting the engines on a circular airfoil, and that seemed to work as far as I could determine. So they got a patent.
That's cool. So that's pretty neat. So what was the rule? Was there a taboo in the office, or you just picked up on that? Otherwise, you wouldn't be talking about your application.
Oh, well, there's no problem doing that. And in the patent office, yeah, I never had any pushback on that from anybody. People seem to be intrigued by
Cool.
the UFO field, and they knew that I and other people looked at it from a scientific engineering point of view. We're not true believers. We don't buy everything we hear, and we're not debunkers where we're just immediately ruling out any possibility of the subject having any, validity. So I think a lot of folks just appreciate that if they can just get the straight facts, and that's what I always try to give people at the office and any place with news media or my colleagues or what have you.
Open-minded empiricism, right? I mean, that's what science is supposed to be about. That's great.
Right. And I still am a person who thinks that science could maybe solve this mystery, but it may be that we yet don't know all the elements of what the phenomenon entails, and it may involve things that science hasn't yet recognized, or we haven't uncovered some of these truths yet for what makes these things operate in the way they do, because they don't seem to follow the way humans would necessarily do things.
Right.
That's, again, my opinion on this.
Well, yeah, actually, but that's a really nice lead into the first question, which is, speaking of science, attempting to grow and change and come to terms with what is being observed, what is the mission of MUFON?
Yeah, well, it's very simply stated. It's the study. It's on our website. It's the study of UFOs for the benefit of humanity, and in this case, humanity would benefit from knowing what UFOs are. I don't know whether we will ever benefit from whatever quote technology unquote is behind UFOs, but that's how we see things. And it may be that it'll benefit all humanity to know how these things work, because maybe we have some scientific breakthroughs, or at the very least, we'll come to grips with maybe what is going on. Is it another intelligence that we're dealing with here?
Yeah, I like that way. It's sort of the high bar is some amazing new technology that makes energy free for the world, but the low bar is what the heck is going on in the sky and in the sea, right?
Yeah, they may destroy us after it's, we'll have to kill you if you find out what's going on, but nonetheless, I think that people who have scientific and engineering minds are curious about these kind of things, and let the chips fall where they may.
Well, wait a minute. I just to be careful, because who knows who's watching this. It's easy for you and I as scientists to sort of say, let the chips fall where they may. They might kill us if we figure this out, but we want to do it anyway. But can we say some softening words about how it's not necessarily likely? Do you actually think it's likely that they'll kill us?
No, I personally don't, but I can't rule anything out.
Right.
They may have some insidious design that takes centuries to change humanity in some way, on a subtle level. And I don't know, but I would think that by this point, 75 years into the modern phenomenon, if they were going to destroy us with heat rays and laser beams and come down and land en masse, this would have happened already, and it hasn't. The UFOs have never. There's some equivocal cases, I guess, but they've never really attacked aircraft per se, or attacked military facilities in at least the US. Who knows what happened in Russia, but I think probably it's the same. We don't have any actual cases that say, wow, they just attacked and leveled this place, or they shot down 5 of our aircraft. I don't know of any cases.
Or even baited us to attack each other. One easy way, if you wanted to destroy humanity, would be just to bait the US to thinking that the Russians had fired a bunch of nuclear missiles, and that, right? So even that hasn't happened. And so, yeah, okay, I just wanted to point that out, because people say these flippant things, they can be taken in far extreme.
Well, yeah, that's the extreme, but I can't actually say that UFOs are acting out of a benevolent purpose. When we study mice or ants or birds or something, we're not necessarily benevolently helping the species all the time. Sometimes we just want to learn how birds migrate or what have you.
Right.
So it gets complicated. Yeah, we could talk a whole hour just on that kind of stuff.
Well, we'll get to that again at the end, but I think that was important to tie in, because I do hear people saying these things that are sort of inflammatory, but it's sort of flippant. And then when you examine it, it's like, no, but what I really believe is this. So I just want to get that here. So what kind of, so you want to you want to benefit humanity with just understanding what the deal is with UFOs. So what kind of UAP related, is it okay if I say UAPs, or do you prefer UFOs?
You can, I'm just used to saying UFOs, but we're talking about the exact same thing if we call it a UAP.
Right, exactly. So what kind of UFO related data do you work with?
Well, we work with any data that comes our way, actually, Julia. So it goes all the way from eyewitness testimony to photographs, to samples of material that sometimes are found above an area, maybe where a UFO hovered, or where it might have touched down on the ground, or maybe something fell from the thing. We deal with radar in those rare instances when we will get radar contacts with UFOs. So we deal with electronic data, photographs, eyewitness testimony, even just written accounts. If there's an account written from 100 years ago or something like that, MUFON's going to want to look at that, as would SCU or the Center for UFO Studies, and glean whatever information we can from it. So we take the whole panoply of evidence, just like in a criminal case. Catching a person or tracking down a crime deals with sometimes just interviewing people. You never get the body, as it were, and other times you get a lot more evidence. So that's the same way with UFOs.
Well, but I do think there is a difference from my interviews, like with CUFOS and with SCU folks. They tend to take data, but then they're not even going to look at most of the data. They're going to focus on, one or two cases a year that they think are really. But I think MUFON is more like a clearinghouse where you want all the data. Is that a distinction that's correct?
Well, yeah, I think even maybe more basically is the Mutual UFO Network is an investigatory organization first and foremost. So that we have 500 or so field investigators. So you need someone out there to get the initial evidence and the eyewitness testimony from a witness, and any videos or photos they may have. So the evidence sort of has to funnel through the investigators to begin with. And then after you get a whole bunch of cases, you can say, well, these have all been looked at very carefully by investigators, and here's ones they think are identified. They're rather a large proportion of the total quantity of cases. And here's a much smaller number that might be 15 or 20% of the total that clearly seem to be mystifying and we can't identify what they are. Then this is when you'd like to have scientists then further look at this information, who can maybe glean some data from it that maybe the field investigators wouldn't have, or you can apply statistical analysis or advanced photogrammetry or photo analysis of these photographs. But someone has to look at the cases to begin with, and that's one of the services that MUFON, their largest service that they perform, I think, to the UFO field.
Well, yeah, it does sound like it. And I have a couple questions about that. So I'm starting to understand a little better what MUFON does. But is it the case that you don't have scientists on staff necessarily? You would take your data and you would send it to like SCU or maybe CUFOS and say, what do you do with this? Or do you, when you mentioned the thing about scientists, it sounded like it was external to MUFON. Is that right? Oh,
not necessarily, no. At one time we had a science review board, and that was headed by Robert Powell, who is now the head of SCU. And so we still maintain quite a few people, say like myself and other people even who have PhDs in the hard sciences or other psychiatry, for example. We have some people in-house that we can go to for cases, but ideally it would be the wish of MUFON that all cases can eventually just get out there and be available publicly. We haven't quite reached that point yet. For sometimes it has to do with computers and everything like this, but that's our ultimate goal, is the information should be disseminated to the scientific and academic community to see what they can make of it.
Yeah, I got it. So you see yourself as like, you're like an incoming funnel, and then you want to get the
exactly.
Yeah, I see.
SCU doesn't pretend to be an investigatory organization in the sense of having field investigators in every state. MUFON does. The Center for UFO Studies is an academic kind of an organization, and they used to have some investigators, but Mark Rodiger would say, well, we never tried to have investigators in every state and organize the states into sections and all this kind of stuff. We would rely on MUFON for some of that stuff.
Right.
And so the three organizations, the Fund for UFO Research, the Center for UFO Studies, and MUFON, worked cooperatively together to the point that we have even an omnibus organization called the UFO Research Coalition. That it's actually a 501c3 organization that ties the three together. So if we need to get together on a community project or some communal project even that we want to work on, we can do that.
Oh, okay, that's a good note. So MUFON, KUFOS, and Fund for UFO Research are actually a 501c3 together.
Yeah, called the UFO Research Coalition. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, and so a couple other questions
That
about
too has my address, but I'm not the head of it.
Well, that's okay. Yeah, no, I'm the same thing. I have an executive director for my
Yeah.
nonprofit, but
Yeah, I saw some of the things on your website there.
yeah, same. So, but about how you do this, you're talking about 500 field investigators. I'm assuming they're volunteers. Is that
Correct.
right?
Correct.
They're volunteers because it's a nonprofit. And are they trained? Who trains them? I mean, how do you know that they're any good?
Well, that is a very good question. We do have an elaborate training thing. We call it MUFON University, but it's training courses that are given to people who come into MUFON and want to be a field investigator. They have to go through online courses and study the field investigator handbook, and even ultimately take a test that judges their knowledge of how to properly go about investigations of different types. And yeah, it doesn't take years and years to go through these. It may take 3 or 4 months to go through some of this stuff. But yeah, we urge all people, not only coming in, but people who have been investigators for a long time, to keep up with the coursework as it's developed, and even go to what we call a boot camp they have every year in Arizona, I think it is, where you can work for a whole weekend, literally out in the field with some real experts in field investigation. And they call in some advisors and other people like that come to address them. Might not even be an attorney sometimes, or a medical doctor or something, to talk about various medical conditions that might ensue from being. Every once in a while, they come up in a UFO case. Someone gets hit with a beam of light and they have problems. So, yeah, we try to keep the investigators up on the current research techniques that we would like to see them use when they're out in the field.
Well, do you train them? We're doing a little bit of a deep dive. We'll get to the other questions soon, but I think this is really interesting for people because no other organization has this. Do you, that I know of, or that you know of, right? There's no other organization that has so many field investigators.
No, we're the largest ones by far in the US. And that's not to say there aren't a couple other smaller groups in the US. There are who are not affiliated with MUFON, but they tend to be kind of maybe more local groups.
Yeah.
And no one has hundreds like this.
Yeah. So are they trained in psychology? Because the psychological, wow, I mean, the psychological aspects of this are huge. I'm not saying people are making it up, but I'm saying discerning whether someone is trying to get attention versus having an actual experience, or discerning whether someone is having a nervous breakdown versus being sane, even regardless of the reality of their experience, that their impact. So are they trained in psychology in some way?
I can't say they go through, they take courses at the community college in psychiatry or psychology or anything like this, but it's made aware of, and it's talked about in the investigator handbook, how you might discern within reason someone who's lying about a case, or an actual hoax on a case, or when a person might be having problems that don't relate to necessarily their UFO experience, but maybe they seem to think it does, but they have underlying psychological problems. So yeah, if that's the case, investigators are urged to contact either their state directors or someone on the board or in MUFON to say, hey, this person seems to have much deeper problems than I as a field investigator can handle, and probably they should be seeking medical treatment, outside of MUFON. So we're alert to those things, and those of us who've been around for decades in the field knows that those things do happen.
Yeah, I would imagine, and I'm really glad to hear that there's a protocol for that. And that people's eyes are at least partially open to those possibilities. I think. Oh,
correct.
Yeah, very, very key. Yeah.
If you hear something almost that sounds too good to be true, like if a person just out of the blue comes to you and says, I had a UFO sighting last night. Okay, the investigator might say, describe it to me. And the person might say, wow, I see this thing every night. I've seen it for years. I just go out at any time and I can see a UFO every day. Immediately your antennae should go up that usually that's not the way the phenomenon works.
Yeah. Actually, so that comes to this is
it just doesn't.
Yeah, this is great because it leads to our next question, which is So what kind of evidence from UFO reports, including new data, would your organization consider to be good evidence? In other words, if you had sort of your prize, sort of like, okay, this is solid evidence, everyone in the organization believes it, what would that look like? What would that evidence be?
That kind of evidence we might not have obtained yet, but it might look like an alien body, for example. So an alien cadaver that is clearly non-human would be seemingly very good evidence, or a large part of a crashed UFO, whatever that might constitute, some kind of metallic wreckage or something like that. A large piece would be good evidence. But really, if that has ever come along, it hasn't come along to MUFON people per se. So we have to deal with evidence.
Like? I mean, well, like, how would you know? Like, if someone says this is an alien body, how do you determine that it's not some kind of body of a mutated animal or something? You know, like.
Well, yeah, of course it would. You know, we have sort of an idea of how we think the entities look sometimes in UFO cases, and again, this is going back for years. And when creatures or beings are reported, they are either of many times of a small stature, sometimes they're quite tall, but you know, wraparound type eyes are often reported and all this kind of thing. So obviously, if the body lying in front of you were a humanoid of some type, and it just didn't seem to have human the proportions of eyes, you know, the mouth, and maybe it wouldn't even have a mouth, who knows? But that would be a pretty good starting point for maybe we have some extraordinary evidence here.
I mean,
you find a discoidal object wedged in the ground. It could be a drone. It could be a cruise missile or something that went off course, but it could be one of these enigmatic flying objects. But like I say, the best I think that the civilian UFO community over the years has ever come up with have been much smaller fragments of things that are said to have either been, you know, dropped off a UFO or left where a UFO had been observed to land. So we're dealing with much smaller things, physical injuries to your body.
Physical injuries to the body. I mean, that could always be sort of, if there's no eyewitness, that could always be some other story, right?
Well, of course,
right.
Of course.
But no, I'm just trying to get at, like, what would you consider to be really good evidence? Like a smaller fragment, if it had properties that weren't explainable, is that the kind of thing?
Well, yeah, you'd have to do a radioisotope analysis on the thing, isotopic analysis, and see whether if this thing said it was, if it turned out to be magnesium, which in one case it has, is it an isotope of magnesium found on the Earth, or is it something that's off Earth, or something that just doesn't, an isotope that just doesn't show up in any terrestrial magnesium whatsoever? Right. That might be a pretty good idea, that, wow, this thing has an off-planet origin.
Yeah, but interesting.
These kind of things are really rare.
Sure.
So we also have to deal with photographs, which can all be hoaxed, videos, which can be hoaxed. But again, you try your best to determine whether a person's hoaxing a sample, they're trying to pass off some sample of slag or something they found, or if it's a video or a picture, did the person just throw something up in the air that's been photographed? Then that's happened for decades. Paste something on a window and then take a picture through the window of an object that seems to be outside, but it's really on the window.
So I noticed
alert to this.
yeah, right. But that's what I'm getting at is the first thing that you said when I said what would be considered good evidence according to MUFON, you didn't talk about photos or videos. You went straight to physical evidence. And what I'm curious about is, would there be a circumstance, like if a very reliable person, like the head of the US Air Force, came to you, I mean, I'm making this up, right? But came to you and said, this is what we saw. Here's our radar data. Here's our videos. We don't have any physical evidence. Would you consider that good physical evidence?
Absolutely, we would.
Okay, so the reputation of the person who's reporting and the concurrent evidence helps, like the radar.
Like you say, the government has not come to us with that kind of evidence. Maybe it has reached out to the scientific community sometimes on a classified level to ask, can you take a look at this sample? Can you take a look at this data? But when they came out with their report last year, the Defense Intelligence report, they had, like, I'm trying to think how many exactly it was, 60 or 80 cases that they said had multiple sensor inputs to these cases, 80 cases where they had electronic data of some type that backed up what presumably the pilots saw.
Yeah.
They haven't ever come out with the details of those cases, but to me that sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
And throughout the course of UFO history, whenever you could get a radar fix on one of these objects or any kind of sensor reading from them, it always immediately raised the level of the case.
Yeah.
So yeah, civilian UFO people didn't get radar stuff too often,
Right.
but we would read a bit, and the government would, and at least in the early days of the phenomenon, give more detailed analyses and narratives of some of these cases. So it was pretty easy for people in NICAP at the time, or APRO was another organization, to say, boy, that's a great case that pilot had. They had the radar evidence, they had multiple eyewitnesses.
But doesn't that make you think? I mean, I don't know. What it makes me think as a layperson to this field is, or as a new person to this field, is whatever the deal is with UFOs, it's apparently they feel that it's time to be seen because they're hanging out now with folks who can get radar off of them. I mean,
No,
that's
no,
not a good. That's not a good.
That's not the case. No, that's not the case.
Okay, good.
If you were to go back and read the types of cases that occurred too, and here I'll talk about military people, flyers, for example, or people who were guards at top secret military establishments around the U.S. They had frequent encounters with these objects back in the late 40s and the 50s, to the point where the Air Force, where the government actually, and even aside from the Air Force, came out with wrote up documents, wrote up reports that said we really can't explain what's going on with any of these cases. They outfly our aircraft, and sometimes they said, literally in as many words, that we haven't gotten to this technology level yet in this country, and we don't think Russia has either.
Right.
So these were top secret reports, classified reports. But the interesting thing is, on some of these things, these reports, these files, didn't just come out last year. Some of them came out in the late 70s and through the mid 80s. So this kind of information, these opinions that the military leaders of this country came out with in the 40s didn't make any news when they came out.
Yeah, that's right.
They're saying amazing things.
Right.
And it turns out that the phenomenon has an investigated in turn top secret bases where nuclear weapons were manufactured. Then they went to storage areas. They approached high tech aircraft of the time in the early 50s, late 40s, jet aircraft, outmaneuvered them, would come right up to them and fly circles around them almost. They then went to nuclear weapons storage areas, and then they went to the ICBM storage silos, and
Yeah.
they would be launched. The Minuteman missiles would be launched from. So all these top secret facilities have had incursions of these objects over the years, and there was absolutely nothing the government could do about it.
Right. Okay.
But they did ignore it. That's one thing they could do. There was nothing they could do.
Right. Well. At least it looks.
They chose to do
looks
nothing.
like it. Yeah. At least it looks like that nothing was done.
Right, because they didn't perceive it as or they didn't define it as a threat. And we're getting into like ufology 401 or something, but they didn't define it as a threat. But yet the things conducted the same kind of reconnaissance operations to a certain extent that the U.S. Aircraft would practice on over Russian territory when they would make incursions over Russia. They do the same kind of ferreting flights and reconnaissance flights, and don't fly too low to the ground. Only the UFOs would ignore some of that. They'd fly low to the ground. They'd hover for long periods of time.
Right.
The Russians wouldn't do that.
Right. So this is all reminiscent. What you're reminding me of is Larry Hancock's book, Unidentified.
Exactly. You've got it.
Yeah. And so he goes into all of the intelligence from the 40s onwards around.
That's correct.
Yeah. So that's an excellent book.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So thank you for that reminder. That's great. Beautiful. So your organization and every other organization I've talked with, you think about explanations for UFO reports, and there's piles, right? So there's natural causes, there's fraud / hoaxing, there's mental illness, and there's piles of human-made things like satellites, and then, which I imagine is just getting huge, and with all the satellites going on now. And then there's the unidentified pile. And then in terms of the unidentified pile, what explanations does your organization sort of culturally favor? Undersea, breakaway civilization, time travel humans? I mean, what is there?
We haven't advanced any hypotheses, Julia, for the unidentified ones. We just put them into sort of two categories. A category where they appear to be maybe some kind of a physical craft of some type, but it's unknown as to what craft it might be. And then another category that's just basically unknown and not necessarily a craft, but it might just have characteristics of an assemblage of lights or something like that, where no actual rigid or metallic body was seen.
This is the distinction between lights in the sky or orbs and it looks like a machine.
Correct.
Yeah.
And either of those types can occur in the day. But yeah, that's the only breakdown we have with regard to the unknowns. But we don't, if a person wants to go beyond that, they have to understand they're speaking for themselves, because MUFON doesn't have any kind of well, here's the official explanation of what we think they are. We haven't done that yet.
Right.
But I mean, I don't think we would have 500 investigators and keep going for 50 some years if we thought we were chasing literally will-o'-the-wisps or weather phenomena or top secret Chinese or Russian aircraft. It just doesn't seem that any of those ever really explain what's going on. So,
well, I heard one person I was talking with was thinking about a potential concern that that the military might have, which is if you have so much publicly available information about these things, some of them are bound to be secret aircraft or secret programs. So then it becomes an actual national security risk. Do you ever get pushback like that?
Well, we do. We get some cases that might fall into that category, but of course, the way some of these UFOs operate has been consistent for 70 some years. So if you see an object that is moving quickly across the sky, let's say it's at night, and it suddenly makes a right angle turn, like literally a 90-degree turn, and then just goes off in that other direction, hardly slowing down at all. That's very difficult for modern aircraft to do, if not impossible. Maybe they can come close to that, but I don't think so.
But I mean, it could be a secret military program in the future, right? That develops time travel, and then it doesn't matter that it's been 70 years.
See,
I feel like, and I'm just,
that's unfalsifiable.
Exactly.
It's unfalsifiable. So I say we can't currently do that, but we couldn't do it in 1948 for sure. Yeah, our technology wasn't as advanced aerodynamically as it is now, but they still outmaneuver humanity's aircraft.
Yeah.
Damn it. It's just
it pisses you off. Does it piss you off? I mean,
it does. I'm very annoyed at this, and I would think that's a good enough reason to look into these things. That's where it could benefit humanity, maybe, by coming up with these better flying machines. We got to get out to the stars sometime, as far as I'm concerned, Julia, and that's one of the things I think as a human being, because I've been interested in the space program for equally as long as I've been interested in UFOs, and I'm an advocate of how are we going to get to the stars? And I'm not necessarily thinking that intergenerational starships are the way to do it. That'll work, but it takes many generations. There's got to be a way to get from here to Sirius or something like that, 11 light years away or something, in a quick amount of time.
Yeah,
these things can do that.
But then it goes straight into interdimensional travel and the idea that these could
exactly.
Right? I mean,
it's speculation.
It's speculation. It's sensible speculation. Based on that, it's such a slog to go through space-time. And every organization that understands space-time would have figured out that that is a slog.
That is correct. That's correct.
Organization or, species.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So we both speculated and we both recognized that we speculated. Okay. That's the fun. That's the fun of this. Okay, so here's a question.
Yep.
We know that, so this question is written oddly, so each time I read it, I sort of rephrase it. But basically, we know that your organization has focused on reporting in investigating those reports and trying to make those publicly available. That's MUFON. That's your niche, right? Is that correct? Did I phrase that?
Yeah, yeah. We have some other we publish a journal, and we certainly work with journalists or people, and we present a symposium. So yeah, we have a number of ancillary things that we do to try to
But it's all with that goal. You're trying to get that information out there.
Correct.
Right. Okay. So given that, now that things are shifting up and the US government is taking UFOs somewhat seriously, and there's these interesting changes happening in terms of publicity, what could you imagine MUFON focusing on in the future? Just paint a picture. That doesn't mean this is the strategic plan of MUFON, but what could you imagine it going forward in addition to what you're doing? Do you think that there could be another kind of role for MUFON, or a changed or smaller role for MUFON, or what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Mark Roddiger is calling me right now, but I'll have to let that go by.
Shall we have him join us? That would be fun.
It's unbelievable. I'll call him back after this. Where does MUFON go?
Yeah.
Well, I can see MUFON and the other groups too having the same mission, that we have a collective knowledge here of this phenomenon, that, again, it's me speaking here, in my opinion, that some of the top people in ufology over the years and the groups collectively know more about the phenomenon than at least the officials of the government seem to have when they had their hearing there in May 17th or whatever it was. So I can see that we could serve in an advisory role to say, hey, they may say, did you ever hear of such a scenario of events like this? And we could say, oh, that's something that shows up rather frequently in cases, and it always involves the landing or whatever it might be. And we could help them out just with our institutional knowledge of cases, past historical cases in the phenomenon, or how these things may have behaved. The military has its own history of involvement with this phenomenon, so they probably have files and cases that obviously they haven't ever released to us. So one would think they'd have more knowledge than the people who were in that committee seem to indicate they had. They hadn't heard of some of the incursions on the Air Force bases, the missile bases, Malmstrom Air Force Base and Loring Air Force Base there in the 70s and 80s.
Or maybe they had to say that they hadn't heard.
Maybe that's true. I can't deny that, but they seem to be good people and working for the U.S. But the one fellow said he wasn't even sure what came before Project Blue Book. Well, there were a couple Air Force studies before Project Blue Book.
I know that, and I'm
like, there's no excuse for saying, oh, I wonder what came before that. Well,
that
doesn't give you a good feeling that these people are on top of the situation.
Right. Well, but so, and even let's hypothesize further. So I think what you're saying is that you all have become really good pattern classifiers for these kind of events. You're like human pattern classifiers for these, and that's a rich resource, and that you would be happy to advise on some of these. And I think that we could assume that there must be similar people in the military, the Air Force, the Navy, who are similar to that. They've held like an institutional knowledge. What I think is interesting is that the patterns that are being classified are going to be different. And that when you all because if I'm in the military, my job is to protect military installations and capacities from any kind of perceived threat. And so I'm going to be classifying this information in a very different way than someone who has a more open stance on, I don't know what this is, but I want to figure it out. And so that's why I think this is my symbol for discussion. So some intersection and discussion would be really useful, because even if they have the institutional knowledge, it's within the standpoint of the organization, and that changes the patterns that are being classified. Yeah,
well, that's why I was especially bothered when that report came out in June there of 2021, I guess it was, because they arrived at the same conclusions. The authors of that report, the intelligence community, the DoD, they arrived at exactly the same conclusions that have been made in 1948 and 1952.
But they had to do that. I mean, I get the frustration.
I know that, but
Yeah, I'm so frustrated. Look,
you can admit that. Then they should have said that in the report. Oh, because these documents were public from the 40s. Now they are now public. Top secret documents are now public. They could have said, yes, our people looked into these things back in the 40s. They couldn't explain them back then, and by God, we can't explain them now. And at least don't reinvent the wheel, or reinvent the saucer, maybe. But
I just think that it's too high of a demand on the DoD and on the intelligence community to ask them to both have disclosure and apologize for bad behavior.
Well, yeah.
I just think if you get one or the other, and I think,
well,
I just, yeah, I mean, I understand. So I come from
no one's asking for exactly what instruments did you use to pick up this data. No one's asking that. We just want to know, oh, for example, what kind of shapes are you seeing? Well, in the redacted version, all the shapes are taken out. The Project Blue Book and the Air Force released shapes lists years and years ago. What percentage were discs? What percentage were cigars? What percentage were spheres? And you're telling me you can't tell us the basic shapes now?
Well, so, right. The thing is,
I'm outraged.
I know, I get it. No, this is good to capture, but I just want to say, from the point of view of putting information out publicly that could be used to compromise our national security, like maybe the shapes thing is a bit, maybe if Russian military.
I'm not buying that. I'm not buying it.
All right, I'm just
okay. It's an opinion. You can have that.
Okay, I'm just going to hold that opinion. And the other opinion I'm going to hold is that when you take, it's a big deal for DoD and the intelligence community to come out publicly and say, this is what we now believe to be the case. There are these unidentified, there's 143 unidentified, cases that we looked at. That's a big deal. I think they're just human beings, and it is just asking way too much to say, also, apologize to us and tell us that we were right the whole time, because.
Well, I don't necessarily expect that. I'm not demanding that of them. I'm not gonna kick someone when they're down, as it were.
I understand the desire, because I study precognition and psychic abilities, and I've been doing it rigorously for about 15 years, and I'm in a field of people who have been doing it rigorously ever since, the 50s. And we keep finding the same results, and we know things. And then in 1995, the intelligence community looked at, the last 5 years of data and said, yeah, actually precognition is a thing. And then nothing happened. And, it's just one of these, it's the reality of institutions that are large and that are publicly funded and that have to really worry about navigating future risks, that they have to do things in a very careful and slow way.
Right. And they're looking for threats to the country, reasonably so.
Yeah.
And so if you say, or if they say, well, there's no threat to the country, our job is then not to investigate these strange things just for the purpose of benefiting science, much less humanity. That's not our job. That's not our job. That's not our remit. Our remit is to look at threats to this country and do what we can to mitigate those threats. So who looks at the information that would give scientific knowledge? Well, scientists in academia, scientists in maybe public enterprises that might be able to find a way to make some money from this thing and have better flying machines.
Or private, you mean the private enterprises? Yeah.
Private enterprise, public stock funded companies, stock companies. But the scientists have not been keen as a class of people over the past 75 years to look into this phenomenon, in large part because the military said, well, there's nothing really going on here.
Yeah.
90% can be explained as IFOs, and we have a 10% residual. It doesn't take much to get those 10% explained too. Well, in my opinion, it does, but nonetheless, that wasn't good enough for basically the scientific community, who took their cues, from the government, and there's no money seemingly in it.
Absolutely.
Who pays these salaries of these scientists?
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's a huge problem, and the whole problem of edge science. So doing science that's considered taboo, but isn't there nonetheless important, and actually maybe more important because it's considered taboo, so it hasn't been looked at by as many mainstream scientists. Yeah. The whole problem of how to deal with that is an unsolved problem in our country. I totally agree.
Yeah. Well, one way you can deal with it is Harvard has an endowment of something like $35 billion. that's sitting wherever it's sitting.
Yeah.
You can't divert a little bit of that into studying a mysterious phenomenon that seems to be baffling U.S. aircraft.
Let's back up like a 10,000-foot view here. What I'm really hearing in a lot of these interviews is people's experience with trauma. What they feel personally, that they've spent their life on something that is only now being admitted to be a real thing. And it's like you want to be included in that, but at the same time, there's so much trauma that you get angry. Right? Is that right? I mean, that's what it feels like.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm angry in a certain, in an intellectual sense, I guess. I don't think I'm traumatized over it, but in the sense that it's, I'd be medically diagnosed as having trauma, but nonetheless, I'm just annoyed that what seems so obvious to me and to people like Mark Roediger and Dave McDonald, the head of MUFON, and has been obvious for many, many years, shouldn't be looked at and isn't being looked at it's not being given a fair shake. And
you wanted to have a fair shake. I totally get it. And I think you're right. But I think it's important to record that anger, because and you've spoken about it in a beautiful way and very clearly. And so I just wanted to record that anger, because that gets it gets in the way of collaboration. If government's like, oh, I don't want to, collaborate with those guys because they're angry. But if you can get it out and say, like, yeah, it's frustrating, but we're going to move forward like you are doing.
Right. Well, I can have this sort of moral outrage with you or with another scientist, maybe in the government, but like it wouldn't preclude me from working with that person at all.
Right.
I would, you express an interest in it, I'll work with you 24 hours a day to figure out what's going on. And Dave McDonald right now is working with at least members of Congress on the intelligence committees here.
Good.
I don't know if he speaks with them every day, but he's in touch with these guys, and they feel sort of like we do. They would go so far, and maybe it's to say we've been lied to by the government, and so maybe they are becoming a little bit, maybe outraged is too strong a word, but they're becoming very miffed at the fact that we haven't been told the truth about what's going on vis-a-vis this phenomenon and our American military pilots, for example, who aren't.
Do you think, okay, that leads us into our last question. This is the one I added. Yeah, so, and I'm just going to feed you a question as we go into the last question. So it's like a double question, but I'm going to try to pretend it's
I might not be able to answer this one.
Well, so do you think, so I guess I have two questions really. One is just a really quick question maybe, which is, do you think that when you say we haven't been told the truth, do you think that there's an elite group of people who actually know the truth, or do you think the truth is that no one knows, and that's the big truth that we haven't been told? So that's question one. And then question two, and it might relate, what are your hopes and fears going forward for MUFON?
The first question, that's a question that a lot of us have devoted a lot of time and thinking to over the years. Do an elite group of people know or not? I don't quite, and I hate to, I'm not going to try to straddle the fence. I'm going to try to give you a good answer on this one, but I almost have to straddle the fence. But let me just go back kind of quickly here to the so-called Roswell incident that you're well aware of. And I do believe, and I'll use that term, maybe I do think that they found something there that can't be, that couldn't have been identified back at that time. Some kind of wreckage was found that didn't seem to be terrestrial or man-made. Possibly scientists were brought in, that's what we seem to hear, to look at this stuff, but I'm not sure anybody figured out what that stuff was. Maybe it was locked up somewhere and it was revisited every couple of years, and okay, the latest technology couldn't explain it, and another decade would go by, and okay, we have some better instruments, but yeah, we still don't know where that came from. And eventually it's just languishes there in some damn warehouse somewhere to where it's really not even a part of anybody's thinking anymore. And yeah, a few people knew at the time, the officials, the head guys and people in some of the agencies, in the Air Force and the DOD back then. And yeah, they knew a very tiny percent. And then they left government service and passed away, and the new people weren't necessarily brought in. So it could be that in general, they don't really know what's going on. I tend to fall down a little bit more on that the vast bulk of these the people within the defense establishment don't know anything about UFOs, and they may know more cases than we do. Their military cases, they obviously know of what happened with those. We don't. But in terms of what's behind the phenomenon, I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure.
I
would think they would conclude that they don't, at this point, that we seem to be dealing with an intelligence, but that's as far as I ever go. We seem to be dealing with a non-human intelligence. I would think that that's a reason that explains the facts.
And apparently that matches with what the military intelligence people say, which is it looks like these aren't the ones that we're interested in aren't human made.
Right. So that would be wonderful if they at least told that. As regards my fears about MUFON, well, that's something I can't say is like quantified in my mind, but one of the fears, I guess, would be that MUFON's core business, if you want to look at it that way, like we discussed, is in investigating cases. What if people just get tired of investigating cases? They look at 50 years of MUFON. You guys have been looking at all kinds of cases. Let me see here. I had the I'll give you a couple of stats here just to give you an indication that cases submitted in 2021, that would be from January through the end of August 2022, I'm sorry, that occurred were reported as having occurred this year. It wasn't somebody reporting in 2022 of a case that happened to them in 2017, for example. So there's currently are 3,700 cases that we got.
Wow.
Yeah, 3,724 that were reported as having occurred between January 1st and August 31st of this year. And of those that have been investigated, I just looked at this today. There are about almost 500 cases of that total. So a little over 18% have been given the unknown explanation, quote, explanation, unquote, on that. And last year, again, it's again, I have it for the whole year. I could have broken it out just 8 months, but all cases submitted to MUFON in 2021 that were said to have occurred in 2021 were 5,638. That'll change, tomorrow maybe as more people file cases and say it happened to me last year. But that's about a typical figure, 5,500 cases per year for the organization. In 22 years, Project Blue Book had something like 12,000 cases that they looked at or investigated. And so MUFON gets that in a little under 3 years. And that's just cases in 2021 and 2022. People file cases of things that happened to them 20 years before that they want MUFON to look into. So that even adds to the total.
So what would, if your fear is that people are just gonna, I mean, that's a lot of cases. If
we don't want to do these anymore. Where's this going?
Yeah, so if people get to that place, then let's flip it over. What's your hope for MUFON? Like that was like the opposite of people getting to that place.
Well, unfortunately, when you word it like that, I'm forced to say, like, my hope that would be that we unravel this phenomenon from A through Z and know exactly what's going on. Well, in that case, then there's no reason for MUFON to exist anymore. So if my hope for this phenomenon comes up, it's that we understand this completely, but oh, by the way, MUFON goes out of existence.
But that's okay, right?
But that's all right, because we could probably write, treatises, and you can still come out with a journal of UFO history, which has sort of been done.
Or you could ditch MUFON, because if you know the answer, like there's other things to do now.
Right. We'll move on to something. Yeah. Another Fortean topic, right?
Right. I think that your fear about MUFON is only a fear, assuming that we don't unravel the UFO mystery. It's only a fear that if the UFO mystery keeps going on, but then all of a sudden, for some reason, people are bored and they don't want to go outside or look, then it's only a problem if they don't file reports, right?
Yeah, well, there's a problem if they don't file reports.
Yeah.
And so far, people can file them right online. That doesn't seem to have inhibited them at all. And maybe people will not want to be investigators. It is a volunteer position. It's kind of hard work. It's much more interesting to look at your iPhone all day long or be online or something, but call people up on the phone and figure out what's going on with this case. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but so far we've been able to find people. And so it's happened for 53 years now. So I'm
Wow.
hoping, yeah, the worst is that no one wants to be part of MUFON. So the mystery goes on, but MUFON doesn't.
Yeah, that would be the worst.
It'd be kind of
So we'll
bad.
just end on a positive note. Let's assume
Please.
that either the mystery is solved soon, or that if the mystery is not solved soon, that people still want to continue to be field investigators and provide reports.
That's correct. I can't argue with that at all.
Okay, good. That's what I'm hearing. So that sounds great. All right. Well, it's been great, Rob. Thanks so much. You were very helpful. Do you have anything that you'd like to add before we turn off the recording?
Oh, well, yeah, there's always stuff I'd like to add, but no, we could go on for some. I'd like if you could stay here like for 2 or 3 hours and we could keep talking about this. But no, I'm not going to. I'm not going to extend it any further. You have things to do, and
so do you.
Yeah, well, I help edit the journal each month, so sooner or later they're going to come in for the October journal. I'm going to have to start working on that, but I have a little time now.
Okay, well, good. All right, I'll stop recording. Thanks for spending time with me.
Yeah, if I can be of further help, just you give me an email and I'll do whatever I can to help you.
Thank you.